Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Johnson, and with me is Evelyn Model. We are your co-hosts for the Interplay Podcast, a place where we ask and answer questions about everything non-speaking. If you're an individual who is non-speaking or unreliably speaking, or know someone who is, this podcast is for you. Come join us as we chat about the things that we have learned from the true experts, the autistics themselves, and listen in when we interview parents, researchers, and more. Okay, welcome to episode 2 of our Shifting the Paradigm series. We have 3 episodes total. So this is our second one. And for today's podcast, we are going to have 3 different advocates, non-speaking, unreliable speaking advocates. So we're going to be highlighting today and just commenting on some of their thoughts that they gave us in relation to our question. And just to remind everyone what the question was that we posed to our spellers is that we asked them to explain something their friends and or family see them doing that is misinterpreted or misunderstood. So our first non-speaker, or first speller, I should say, is Mac. And Mac requested that we have his read through our app. So I'm going to have that done. Here's Mac's words.
Inward states of dysregulation remind me of how challenging life can be at times. It happens more than anyone realizes. On the outside, it appears as if I am feeling totally normal, but that is not so. A lot of insecurities compete for my attention. Can someone help me calibrate my nerves?
All right, thanks, Mac. I think Mac brings up a number of things that we see and hear from our spellers. And Evelyn, what do you think we both know Mac really well, but what do you think Mac's really trying to highlight for us here?
Well, it's interesting. Well, first I'd like to say Mac's 16. So I think it's important also to, think about where they are in their stages of life. And we've known Mac, like you said, for several years. And, when I hear him talk about this, to me, it just highlights how dysregulation can be really hard to observe. Typically, we think we can see it and spot it so easily, right? Like crying sometimes, or injurious behavior towards self or others, or yelling, or even fleeing or running from a situation. And, we look at that and I think automatically say, oh, my goodness, they must be dysregulated, right? But Mac's words really highlight the fact that we can't really tell. Mm-hmm. And when we see those behaviors, right, maybe they are dysregulated and maybe they're not. I've talked to some spellers before where they're telling me, where one was crying, one was running from an area, and they were telling me, I am trying to stay, I'm fine, I feel good, I don't know why I'm crying, and I don't know why my body keeps trying to leave the room, and then, so that's one way of looking at it. And then Mac saying, he appears content on the outside, typically, mm-hmm. Yet on the inside, he's not, and he's pretty anxious. So, I think it's just so important to understand that we can't rely on body language. Yeah. And that's really, for me, when I'm listening to your words, Mac, that's what's like so 100% apparent to me, is body language is not an indication of what's going on. And so, yeah, we need to be checking in, and we need to be finding out, what's going on, and because we can't tell just by looking.
Absolutely. And I think that is one of the most difficult things for parents and caregivers to kind of think about in the moment, right? Because when the speller or the CRP is dysregulated, but certainly when the speller looks dysregulated, is when we kind of will react. When they don't look dysregulated, we don't react. We don't naturally think about the fact that they could be dysregulated on the inside. And it just highlights, once again, insides don't match outsides. And like you said, check-ins as far as making those connections with your speller is huge. And to think about doing that more often, just because we don't know. And some parents will come to me and say, well, this happened out of nowhere. And, if you are one that tends to keep your dysregulation inside and not outwardly appear, and then all of a sudden it gets to that max where you just can't anymore. And then it seems like it's coming out of nowhere, when in fact it's actually been building up. And so I think that's something that even myself had to really consider and think about, because it's not natural for us as neurotypicals to do that. We socially look at individuals from the outside and go, oh, they're happy, they're sad, they're anxious, they're this, they're that, when it just doesn't fit with our guys, for sure. So I think that Mac's quote really highlights the fact that we do need to check in, and like you said, check in way more often than we typically do.
Right, I agree. What do you think? What would you say? What would your advice be to parents or family members, CRPs? When we do see what appears to be dysregulation, in terms of checking in, like, I get this question a lot, but I'd like to hear, what you say. When would be a good time to check in? What kinds of questions should we ask? That sort of thing, so that we're not, heightening the state. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And I think for us, I always think about, and I use this example for parents to kind of get and understand that it's during the moment is their purposeful motor is not happening. So we know that we need purposeful motor to spell. And for us, even when we're anxious, upset, whatever it might be, frustrated, our motor isn't very accurate either, because we go and say things that later we go, yeah, maybe that wasn't such a good choice of words to say to somebody, or and so I think that purposeful motor demand on a speller to spell how they're feeling, why they're upset in the moment, is not the time to ask about that. And again, it completely depends on where they're at in their ability to spell, because I think that ultimately, when I have a speller, and maybe you could give some examples too, when you have a speller that seems dysregulated, their body is dysregulated. So whether that means that they're anxious or super excited, because they can both look like the same thing, it's more that I help to co-regulate, to help to get that body more organized, and of course through cognitive input and purposeful motor to help to get that down. And then if it's something where we can work to, let's tell me more about, so that I can support you better, and that I can learn about your body and the brain body disconnect in order to be able to support you in those moments, because it is in a lot of ways learning something completely different than what you've, like in Mac's case, he's 16. This isn't something that as a parent you can wake up the next day and just 100% understand. I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, I still don't understand some of our completely get on the nose, like what's going on with our guys. So I think it's like you said, checking in, but definitely a learning experience for all of us. So that's like, if it was in a session with me and or I was talking with a parent, that's definitely what I would talk to them about.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great advice. That co-regulation piece, to get that first, and then to be able to then move forward.
Yeah,
Excellent.
because none of us can do anything without being regulated, right? Like we have to be, that's the goal of any motor, really supporting that brain body connection in order to communicate, or in order to do something purposeful with your body. If we don't have regulation, neither one of those things are going to work out. So
I agree.
Yeah. All right, shall we move on to our next guy, Joey?
Yeah, do it.
Okay. Okay. So Joey is 24 and he lives here in Florida. And Joey's words, he says, I would say my body language can sometimes be a poor reflection on how I really feel inside. People see my hyper movements and expect that I'm anxious or uptight. But in reality, I like to move around because that's when I feel my body the most. I try to put my stimming away, but this is a goal I have to work on more. It would be hard, but definitely worth it. So I think here, Joey's words really kind of got a couple, like I was thinking specifically about a couple of things similar to what Max said. But I think with Mac's body, he seems calm, but inside he's dysregulated, where Joey's the opposite, where Joey looks dysregulated and anxious. And I personally know Joey, and absolutely, if you were someone who was just walking into the room and observed him, you would definitely think that he would be anxious and dysregulated. So when he's inside, but inside, he doesn't feel that way. And I think the second thing that I love that he talks about is more of that sensory piece. So when he is moving, that is when proprioceptors, because when we move our body, that's those proprioceptors are activated, we get a better sense of their body in space. So Joey has learned that his body has learned that is going to help him make him feel better. So this is what he does. But once again, we kind of look at that as like, oh, he's very anxious, ADD, he can't focus, he can't attend to something yet. Yeah, he's super calm inside. So that's just a couple of things for Joey's words, and that's really what it was interesting to me to kind of see his reflection.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you, Joey, for sharing that. I thought, Mac had given us his response, and I read Joey's, and I thought, oh my gosh, how beautiful. They just kind of really complement one another and kind of speak to the opposites, really. And I think, in terms of a lot of the spellers that I work with, typically I'd say I see a lot of Joey type bodies, where we look at what's going on and we just see a lot, right? There's a lot going on. And to hear what he has to say about, it's not necessarily anxiety, and not to say that he's not anxious here or there, but it's really his way of regulating and feeling his body. And I think for neurotypical people as a whole, who don't have to necessarily seek so much input to feel our bodies, that's a really big it's a really big concept, I think, to understand that there are lots of people out there that don't necessarily feel their body unless they're doing something to feel it. You think about, sitting here and, if you want to feel your big toe, you can put your attention on your big toe, and we could probably feel our big toe without doing much, stimulating it really. And then, but there are people that, they can't feel their hands. They can't feel, lots of body parts, and they need movement in order to do that and to feel, part of their body. So I think it's a really big topic, and one that I think we can explore some more, because it is so different, I think, from what people are used to.
Yeah. Okay, and then one other thing that I was going to mention too that I just thought about with Joey is that, I think that when we're looking at the outside and seeing that dysregulation or what seems like anxiety, without knowing that, especially parents understanding completely that they're fine on the inside or they're actually very calm, parents don't want to push. So parents don't want to say, oh, well, come, let's go do this, or let's go do some exercises, let's go work out, let's go practice spelling, let's go do this, because they don't want to then go, oh, wow, they're going to be so dysregulated. And I think that obviously a check-in or something like that to confirm it, but I think that there are times when our guys would be like, no, I would love to do this and I feel great, let's go do this. But then parents are reading what their body's doing and what's on the outside, and they don't want to push. And so I think for us as practitioners, to be able to demonstrate that is really helpful for parents, but then certainly to highlight it and then to coach them through that.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I see that very often because there's that balance, right? And of course we don't want to push too hard and have, a meltdown of any kind. But on the other hand, they may need that push and they may want that push. And, I saw that, for example, with one of our guys who wanted to learn how to ride a bike. And, he got to pick out the bike. He got, everything he needed, was so excited. And I'd say the first half a dozen times on the bike, appeared like he was extremely dysregulated. It looked like he didn't want to be on the bike. And it looked like he was being forced. But again, this parent was well aware of the brain-body disconnect and has open communication with them. So they were doing check-ins and he was like, this is amazing. I love this. And, and then at the same time, very loud vocally, sweating profusely, kind of, looks of fear on the face. But again, it was his body was doing things that he, putting his body into positions that he wasn't familiar with, wasn't comfortable with, but cognitively he knew what was going on. He wanted to do it. But his body was sort of like in that, I wouldn't say refusing, but it would be more just challenged getting into those positions. And so, that was something but had they not had, and this parent had said to me, thank God for communication, because had I put him on a bike, before this, and this is what happened, he would have been off in a couple minutes. And I would have thought that I was doing him a favor by taking him off, because it would have been, this is not what he wanted to do, and I misunderstood. And so she just kept reiterating, like, thank God for communication. Thank God for communication. Because he actually likes it.
No, it's such a big thing to highlight. And I think, like you said before, we'll definitely have to have more of a conversation. Parent experience would be great with this, pre and post reliable communication, maybe in terms of how did we work with them and when I would give up, just like you said, because it seems like they're not. So I think that that this really then transitions beautifully into our next advocate, Catherine. So I'll let you go ahead and read her words.
All righty. So this is Catherine McAllister. She's 17 years old and she's from Atlanta, Georgia. She says, "Hello world, my name is Catherine. I am autistic, a speller, and an unreliable speaker. If you were to meet me, you would hear me speak nonsense. You might also hear me scream or curse. If you were to read my words, you may meet someone a little different. I am deep, wise, and funny. I do love a good curse word, but not as often as I say them out loud. When people meet me, they see unreliable me. They assume that it's all of who I am, and then I become that for them. It's unreliable, even for me. I battle day and night with this. Connecting with others is what lights me up, so being misunderstood is heartbreaking. I am Catherine McAllister. I am so much more than my mouth's trickiness, but I am also not for those who can't see the whole me." Wow.
Right? So much to unpack in that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll let you start. Go for it.
I know. First of all, thank you, Catherine, for taking the time to answer this question for us. And, unreliable speech, like we mentioned, I think in the last episode, seems to be one of the trickiest, I'd say, and most challenging perceptions to shift. There's so much really to consider, right? Like how much is reliable? how much of it is unreliable, when is it reliable, when is it unreliable. And, you know, I think for therapists, educators, you know, it's probably easier for us to work through this than it is for parents, because, you know, up until now, or the recent past, if they've been in this community, they were assuming things were reliable. And so it's hard to really change that perception and shift it, and know when things are reliable or not. And, you know, I think the understanding of what really speech is, which is something that, you know, we talk about a lot in S2C, you know, speech is 100% motor. And knowing that, the individuals that we work with have motor differences and motor challenges, and we can really see speech as motor, and it's really the finest of motor that we have. I think that's where, you know, the understanding needs to start, and then we can build from that. And then, you know, I know that we've talked to Catherine and her mom, Erin, in the past, and they've really shared a lot with our community, which was just so wonderful, because we do have a lot of, I'd say, unreliable speakers in our community in the Tampa Bay area. And, you know, I think Erin does a really great job of, you know, recording what Catherine says with her voice. And it's interesting, I think, when she's asking them questions or having conversation, and Catherine will speak, and then Erin writes it down in quotations, and then she kind of goes back to the letterboards, and she's like, you know, I hear what you just said, you know, let's confirm on the letterboards. And then on the letterboard, she then writes everything in all caps so that she knows what is what. And that is really how she's been able to decipher and to know, okay, you know, this is something the letterboard is reliable, pretty much is what I'm saying. And then she can look back at the speech and say, how reliable was that speech? Was it reliable? Was it completely off? What's going on? And I think that it, you know, does it take time and does it take a lot of effort? Absolutely. But if you're really wanting to get to know your child, your student, I think in terms of unreliable speakers, I think that's the way to go.
And we have to, you know, for them, because I know, well, you and I both know, we work with the unreliable speakers, and they're very good unreliable speakers, some of them, where it's very tricky. And that's why we want to put a whole podcast episode to unreliable speakers, because it's the trickiest for sure, especially when you have some that can almost seemingly carry on a conversation. But I think that for parents, it is putting that work into it to ensure, because that's what's going to reduce the frustration on the part of the speller, is for us to all take the time and get to know what is reliable and what isn't. And also from their point of view, do you want to, you know, you're answering a question or you're having a conversation in school, you want to answer a question. Do you want to use your mouth, or do you want to use the letterboard? To give them that, you know, that choice, so that they know that what they're going to say is reliable. And I think with practice on the letterboard or keyboard, that's practicing their motor skills. And so that is going to help support their more reliable speech, and get not to the necessarily at all to the point of 100% reliability. However, it does help support that. And I think that even in some of our guys here in Tampa, in our community, you know, they're feeling more confident in their ability to be more, but this is a constant process. And I think, you know, what Erin does with Catherine, they've developed their kind of goal, their synchrony and their plan and their way in which they make this work. And so as the speller, and that goes back to relationship, right? So building that relationship and trust. And, Catherine's like, my mom's got me. She understands this coming out of my mouth is not reliable. She's going to write it down, and then she's going to check in with me. And then, we have other parents that do things differently, but still effective, and their kids understand and know. Obviously that brings down anxiety, that brings down stress, and they can support that. Another thought that I had, which is kind of shifting a little bit, but one that I talk with a lot of parents about early into, whether it's working with us or school, talking to parents, well, my child speaks, and that is something that I think in the autism world, and I'm saying like big open autism world, that is like, well, I want them to speak. So because my child speaks, like speaking is like the thing. And so I never considered it being not what they want to say. And that's where, we talk about the brain body disconnect at that point. But I think that the goal is always for speech. And so when they have it, it's like, okay, well, we're good. And the responding, and we're going to also know, or we're also going to probably be doing an episode on loops and what that all is, like motor loops, because with the unreliable speech, you start to get into the motor loops with your son or your daughter or student, where you're responding to what is actually coming out of their mouths, and it actually isn't reliable, and then it becomes this loop that will we start to make and build and practice over and over again, which becomes something that's really frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. I think unreliable speech is something that I think we will continuously talk about. And the other thing I wanted to mention is Erin and Catherine had talked about how they've been using the letterboards as a reliable means of communication for a while. I don't remember, forgive me, I'm not sure how long, but I want to say at least 5 years. And I think it's more than that. But what I'd like to say is Erin talked about this summer how she has seen Catherine's purposeful speech get better and better over the years. And so, when parents say, well, my child is a speaker, they have words, they can talk, right? And then they say, well, so then they take them as reliable. Then they also, I see a lot of parents, their reactions to the letterboard, well, but I don't want to take their speech away. I don't want them to spell and then, lose the speech that they have. When in fact, practicing purposeful motor is what we're doing really on the letterboards, and that's just going to enhance their speech and enhance their purposeful and reliable speech. That's something that I think is misunderstood by a lot of parents in the community, and they think that if we're focusing on spelling to communicate using letterboards, then that means that I'm not working on speech anymore, and they're going to lose their speech, or they're whatever the case may be. But in fact, it's the opposite. It actually supports purposeful and reliable speech. So again, we can explore this for a long time, and I'm sure there'll be more episodes about it, but I think that's really important to remember.
For sure. And when we do some more episodes on things like working on purposeful and motor skills, so whether it's engaging in a hobby or doing a workout or an activity of daily living, and we hear them speak like, I don't want to do this anymore, it's just it's the importance of thinking about it from that perspective too, where, I've had many clients where they're like, no more. And, then we get their form of reliable communication, and it's, don't stop. This is great. Feels so good. Helps my body, all of this kind of feedback. So I think that it is really important in every area. academics as well, especially for students when they're working and doing academics and academic content. So yes, I think that this will be something that's going to come up over and over and over again in pretty much probably almost every podcast that we talk about, whether it's with parents or whether it's with others, non-speakers, or, in some of the research people that we're going to talk with. Like, this is something that I think I'm excited about being able to share more about our experiences, and then hearing from our listeners and their experiences, and then questions that they may have, so that we can either talk about them on here or even pose them to some of our guys as well. So yeah, I think that this is, like we said, episode 2. So we have one more episode in our series of Paradigm Shift, and it's going to be really exciting. We have two really interesting spellers that we're going to be talking about and with for our next episode. So anything else, Evelyn, or are we just shooting for that 3rd episode?
Really excited for all of these episodes, and I'm just grateful that we are able to have this conversation together, and then with our greater audience. I think this is how we can change the perceptions that have been around for many, many years, and I think we just need to continue this conversation. Thank you guys for listening to us and listening to our amazing spellers and what they have to say, because those are the experts.
Great. Okay, we will see you all next time.